My wife, 26 female, and I, 29 male, got married and rented our first apartment for 5 years. We bought our first house when our child was a year and a half old. It was a farmhouse that was in foreclosure. The previous owner had split it into a duplex due to the financial hardships they faced. There was another couple living in half of the house when we first moved in. They had 90 days left to vacate. We didn't get to meet or see them at first, but the reality agent told me they homeschooled their kids and lived here for years. Everything was blissful at first. My wife helped me to start unpacking and settling into our new home together. Even our little boy helped us to carry in his toys one at a time. We could finally own animals, so within the first month we got a horse, cow, and chickens. The three of us spent time with our animals. My wife and I took turns riding the horse with our son. While we were out enjoying one of the last days I had off work, something caught my wife's eye. I matched her gaze and saw a very healthy-looking man. He was making chopping firewood look easy. I assumed he was our neighbor, but even though he saw us, he didn't say anything. I wondered if he was bitter with me for buying the house that he had been renting for his wife and children for so long. I wondered if they had found a new home or if they were desperate to stay where they were. I was a nice man, and if they wanted to introduce themselves, they could. My wife was still staring at him, so I told her to stop. She blushed. I thought about introducing us, but I just wanted my wife to stay away from Mr. Woodchop. While I was at work the next week, my wife told me she got to hang out with the neighbor for a bit. I asked her which one, which caught her off guard for some reason. She admitted it was Mr. Pooler, while Mrs. Pooler was upstairs taking a nap with their kids. She always napped at the same time every day because her medicine exhausted her. I was uncomfortable, and she looked embarrassed. I asked what they did, and she said they just played cards and talked about the benefits of living in the countryside. I thought it was weird, and I told her not to spend time with him alone. She rolled her eyes, smiled, and told me not to worry. I asked her if she thought it was funny to spend time alone with another married man. She put her serious face on, but I felt like she was pleased that I was jealous. She told me I needed to trust her and that she would never cheat on me. I told her I didn't want her to spend time with him alone. She agreed, but only because she saw how upset I was getting. I didn't believe for 1 second that she understood my reasoning behind it. She denied any wrongdoing. I was off work unexpectedly one day, a week after my wife hung out with the neighbor. I answered a knock at the door. My wife tried to tell me she would answer it, but I was closer, so I answered it. It was Mr. Pooler with a bouquet of flowers. I took them, confused. He stammered to explain that they were a goodbye gift from his wife. My wife accepted them, looking quite embarrassed. I told him it was nice to finally meet him, and I introduced myself as my wife's husband, putting my arm around her shoulders and squeezing. She was bright red, staring at the flower petals. Mr. Pooler then wished us a good evening before fleeing. I put my wife on the spot by asking her why he brought her flowers. She stammered, saying she didn't know why. I told her I didn't believe they were from Mrs. Pooler, and she had the nerve to tell me that I was overreacting and thinking too hard about this. She wanted me to drop it and reminded me that I had to work the next day. I was officially suspicious that something was happening between my wife and the neighbor. I installed cameras inside and outside of our house that night, refusing to go to bed until I was done. My wife hated this. She asked me if they would take up all of our solar power, and I said no. She asked me if someone could hack into her camera feed, and I said no. She asked if I could watch her remotely, and I said yes. I got a live feed from it on my phone. She seemed very displeased for some reason, but tried to recover by saying it made her feel safer. I started watching my wife while I worked. For a week and a half, nothing interesting happened, and I just found it nice to be able to check in on my wife and son while I worked. I started to check the live camera feed less often. Weeks later, I decided to check the feed while I ate lunch. My son was sleeping in his crib while my wife was typing on her phone. She set it down, took a pie out of the oven, and headed next door with a big smile on her face. She was let inside quickly. She was on their side of the house for a while. I could not believe it. When I got home, I asked her what she did, and she said she talked to Mrs. Pooler about homeschooling. I didn't believe her, so I went next door, despite my wife trying to say that Mrs. Pooler was sleeping now. I thought it was weird that she was trying to tell me she was sleeping. I knocked on the door and was greeted by Mr. Pooler. I asked to speak with Mrs. Pooler so I could corroborate my wife's story. He was immediately defensive and said I didn't need to speak to his wife. I could just speak to him. I decided to jump in full force and tell him I knew he was sleeping with my wife. It was like he was surprised I said it, but had a planned defense. He smiled nervously and said that was an unfair accusation. That's when his wife started coming down the stairs, rubbing her eyes. She asked what was going on. I asked her if she spoke to my wife earlier in the day, but her husband yelled over me, saying he already answered my question. Then he slammed the door in my face. I heard them yelling inside, but no one came outside to talk to me. I slept on the couch that night, unsure of what to do. My wife only maintained the same story she told me before. For a few days, nothing interesting happened. I would check the camera feed at work, and my wife was at home. Then, when I least expected it, my wife went back over to their house at the same time as before, this time with cookies. She was inside for 30 minutes before I decided to go home and see what was happening. I figured since I owned the house now, I could get away with opening their front door. As soon as I did, I saw my wife and Mr. Pooler having sex on their couch. My wife wailed no and started crying immediately, just as quickly as she started trying to put her clothes back on. Mr. Pooler was frantically trying to dress too, furious with me for opening his front door. The yelling and crying, and my claiming to be right all along, caused Mrs. Pooler to wake up and come downstairs with the kids. They weren't fully dressed yet, so she immediately assumed the worst. I told her I just caught them having sex, which really sent her into a spiral of grief. She accused him of breaking vows, breaking her heart, breaking her trust, and breaking apart the family. The kids started crying due to the stress of the situation. We both kicked out our spouses, despite their lies, objections, and grief. My wife tried to say it was a stupid mistake, blaming the temptation of having another man right next door, instead of taking accountability for the fact that she cheated on me, her loving, loyal husband and provider. I screamed it in her face. I told her she cheated on me, said she was having trouble accepting this truth. I told her I wouldn't allow myself to be disrespected in such a way, and I wouldn't call her my wife ever again. In the midst of the yelling and sadness, I ushered her back to our side of the house and forced her to pack her clothes. She was mortified. She didn't want to leave the place we just bought and called home. She didn't want to leave our son and didn't know where she would go. I told her AP should take care of her, since whatever they had was more important than 2 long-term marriages with children. She sobbed, shaking her head, admitting that the affair wasn't as valuable as maintaining a happy and successful marriage. She begged me for forgiveness. Just one more chance to be my wife and have the family and life we expected to have. I told her that life and expectation was gone. The love was too. I didn't want to love her because she chose to love another man. My wife was a shaking, sobbing mess when she left at the same time as AP, with their cars packed. It was a terrible, life-altering moment to see her drive away, knowing it was within my power to stop her from leaving. Weeks later, my wife had called twice to talk to our son, but never told me where she was or what plans she'd come up with. We, ex-Mrs. Pooler and I, found out that they moved into an apartment together out of state. I was really surprised that neither of them showed up to the court hearings, not even for custody. It was like they encouraged each other not to care. They didn't try to get custody or even visitation. Just before the 90-day limit was up, I agreed to let her and her kids stay on a yearly lease for less rent per month. Now I'm proud to say I live a completely self-sufficient life off the grid with my kids on our farm. Our exes split less than 2 years after moving in together, after losing all legal rights to their children. OP, this is shameful, and their actions prove that neither of them know how to maintain a long-term relationship. It was a wonderful idea to install cameras as soon as you suspected your wife's infidelity. It's the ultimate disrespect for her to continue going over there and cover up her activities with lies. It's also shockingly disrespectful of AP to cheat on his wife while she slept off her exhaustion. This situation is terrible, but it's unfortunately happening all over the country. We live in an age where constant gratification and refusing to take accountability is the norm. People are encouraged to live in denial of their own wrongdoings just because they were following their heart or making life decisions based solely on emotions. It wasn't so long ago that the average person was in control of themselves. They didn't disrespect or dishonor their family, and they did the best they could to avoid such temptations. Anyways, thank you for sharing your story with us. Let's now move on to our next story for today. My girlfriend, 23 female, really wanted to go on a camping trip in July of the same year we graduated from college. This camping trip was with a group of close friends and classmates that were all going their separate ways that summer. I, 24 male, was already hired in the career field I was hoping for. I was eager to start, and they wanted me to start immediately after graduation. So even though I couldn't attend the camping trip, my girlfriend asked me if she could go. We've been together for 3 years, almost the entire time we spent in college. Throughout that time, she maintained a presence on social media. She would share everything she went through, even the embarrassing moments. One time, she was caught on her phone in class, and the professor asked her to stay after class. As soon as he started talking to her about her excessive phone use, she was live streaming. The awkward conversation made it clear that my girlfriend was only defensive of the choices she made, without taking the time to consider why her choices might not be that great. After the stream, she read the comments, where people called her out for her entitlement and refusal to take accountability. This upset her so much that she locked herself in her dorm for 2 days. I was eventually able to get her to come out. I told her that people mess up sometimes, but when you do, you just try to do better next time. She appreciated my words and actually stopped posting as much as before. Still, she made at least one live stream video per day. I noticed in the comments of her videos that she had a lot of random men telling her how beautiful and right she was. One of these men was her ex-boyfriend, who was her high school sweetheart. She had tons of people complimenting her and telling her she could get through anything. I wondered if all this encouragement from her ex and strangers had an effect on how she went through life. Even though she never cheated on me or gave me a blatant reason to distrust her, I still wanted to know who was going on this camping trip. She started naming females in the group first, but I told her to screenshot all the names from the camping group chat and send it to me. She hesitated and said she'd rather just tell me. I asked her why, and she couldn't think of a reason. What I was asking wasn't that hard to do, so she did it. It took her longer than I expected, but she sent me a list of 13 people. Some were men, but I knew them all, and we were like brothers. They were so responsible that I actually felt better knowing they'd be there. My girlfriend and I lived together in the furnished basement of our landlord's house, but I like to call him our overlord. He was nice enough, but we had to make sure our television was on low volume by 6 p.m., or else he'd tap on the floor. There was a kitchenette, where my girlfriend was sweet and talented enough to cook meals for us. While she was doing just that, I kept hearing her phone ping. Eventually I checked it and noticed that there were 14 people in the group chat. She must have edited the screenshot of the list to cover up the name of her ex-boyfriend. She ended things with her high school sweetheart after they started attending our college. We met shortly after, and she waited an entire year before even telling me he was her ex. He was one of the friends in our circle, but after she told me that, I kept my distance. I didn't trust that he wouldn't try to take her back the first chance he got, and now her sneakiness was proving my hunch to be right. I approached her about this, and she was prepared to swear to me that he wasn't going camping. He was only part of the group because he was driving someone else to the meeting point. She said that was why she edited his name out of the list, because she didn't want me to worry. I scrolled through the chat and other messages on her phone and didn't find anything from him. When she begged me to trust her, I gave in. I didn't find anything incriminating, and he wasn't part of the planning or discussion at all. Still, the night before the trip, I asked her not to go because I didn't agree with it and I couldn't go along with her. I added that since I was her man, I felt that she was my responsibility. She told me I was overthinking it and being ridiculous because I wasn't her father and she was her own person. I countered, saying we were in a committed relationship, so I should protect her. She told me she had to be able to do what she wanted, otherwise our relationship wasn't going to last. I was devastated when I went to work the next day. I kissed her goodbye, uncertain whether or not it was the last time. While she was on her trip, I watched the posts and pictures she was tagged in by her friends. I noticed right away that her ex was on the trip, and she was standing or sitting by him in all the pictures, so she blatantly lied to me. On the picture of them sitting by the fire together, her friend left a comment that said she just loved how my girlfriend had to change the sleeping arrangements. A winky heart face followed. I called her immediately. As soon as she answered, I told her we were over. She freaked out and started sobbing, asking why, claiming she hadn't done anything wrong. I told her I knew she slept with her ex and that he was there with her on the trip. I told her I didn't trust her at all anymore. She sniffled and took a moment before asking me why I thought that. I hung up on her. She actually showed up to my house the next day. She was waiting for me outside when I got home from work. Believe it or not, she was with her ex. He drove her to my house. I was upset as soon as I saw them. I got out of my truck and started telling her to go get her stuff out of my place. She started telling me that she wasn't cheating on me. We repeated our lines until we were blue in the face. Then she looked at AP and told him to talk to me before she walked into the house. I was surprised when he told me that she told him she'd only continue seeing him if he swore to tell me that they didn't sleep together, and that he only decided to tag along at the last minute. However, the truth was that they did sleep together, a lot, because she wanted to. She told the group that I broke up with her the night before the trip. Then, when I called and broke up with her, she lost it because she was caught and didn't really want to lose me. That's when AP realized she was a huge liar and not worth investing his time into. He decided to drive her here just so he could tell me the truth so we could both dump her. This was the best opportunity I was going to get, so I thanked him. As soon as she walked out with just a single backpack of her stuff, AP told her not to put it in his car because he didn't want anything to do with her. I added that neither did I. Her jaw dropped. Her backpack fell off her shoulder and she started whining, pleading with both of us, either of us, to change our mind. It was pathetic. AP got in his car after wishing me luck. I walked past her, closing the door to the basement before she could stop me. She didn't have a key. She cried and wailed outside the door, trying to say anything to get me to let her in or at least get more of her stuff. The only thing I said to her through the door was that she could come back another day, and her stuff would be waiting for her outside. She hated that and complained about her stuff potentially getting stolen or rained on. I ignored everything she said and all the banging until she called her mother. She loudly pleaded with her on the phone right outside the door. I put headphones on and eventually discovered that she was gone. Her mom refused to help her get any of her stuff and bring it to their house because, according to her, there was no room. I think her mom was extremely bitter towards her for ruining a great relationship and having to move back in while her parents were trying to enjoy their alone time together. After 2 years, my ex still had not gotten a job within her degree or even asked me about the rest of her belongings. Instead, a short time after moving back in with her parents, she realized it was much easier to start selling pictures and videos of herself online. That's how she makes money. And whenever her parents go on a trip or vacation, she makes videos in their kitchen or living room like the house belongs to her. I sold her belongings and actually got a decent amount of money from the handbags, which is great because I was the one to buy her some of them. I haven't dated since this experience, but I'm not upset about it. I feel content working the job I've always wanted to work, while I lift weights and aim to be a wise man. OP, your girlfriend proved herself to be a very low-quality woman, without much regard or consideration to the consequences of her actions. It's as if she convinced herself she could get away with anything and didn't want to believe it was wrong of her to sleep with 2 men at the same time. A lot of women today even believe it's normal to sleep with a man shortly after meeting him for the first time, and that while they do that, it's acceptable to continue talking to other men while posting pictures and videos of themselves online. Your girlfriend was no different than women like this. None of them are as unique or worthy of commitment as they believe, because men don't want to commit to flashy, easy women. They want a woman they can lead, trust to remain loyal, and count on to be his peace. That means no communication with other men, and enough dignity to stop posting videos and pictures online. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.